so much, everyone, for joining the second session of AVDF Cafe. I'm here again with new topic in front of you. Now, that's I would say, one of the exciting topic of AVDF. People who are new to this session, this is a quarterly series. We run thrice in a quarter in 3 different time zones, and you can join that AVDF Cafe as per your convenient time zone. With me, I have my colleague Rich. Rich is outbound PM for North America, and he's also an inbound product manager for Database Vault. I also have one of the development lead, Vijay Medi, as part of a panelist. So if you have any query related to AVDF, or since Rich is there, it should not be stick to AVDF. You can have any Oracle database security related query also. You can use Q&A channel. In Q&A tools to ask your question, we encourage that you use Q&A rather than chat, because we are not, we won't be following chat for Q&A. So ask your query on Q&A, utilize this particular opportunity. If you have any specific question on AVDF deployment, since we have a development lead also as part of a panelist. Thank you so much, and let's start our presentation for today. So today's topic is reference architecture for Oracle Audit Vault Database Firewall. We keep on getting a lot of queries that how should we deploy Audit Vault and Database Firewall in different scenarios. So today we will cover this topic. I'm Nazia Zadi, Product Manager for Oracle Audit Vault and Database Firewall. So today's agenda, we will just talk a little bit overview of AVDF, because sometimes we have new folks, they just want to understand what exactly AVDF. And then quickly we will move to the AVDF components. What are the components, how they play important role in the deployment. And then we will talk about our main topic, which is reference architecture reference. This is like different use cases, deployment models, etc. And finally, we will summarize our presentation. So AVDF, Audit Vault Database Firewall, is a comprehensive database activity monitoring solution. Why we say that it's a complete and comprehensive active database activity monitoring solution? Because it gives you a database auditing, which is like a sure shot evidence of what exactly happened on your system, along with the network-based SQL traffic activity. So what is happening in the real time, that's more coming over the network, and what exactly happened in your system and written to the audit logs. So together, they provide a very comprehensive 360-degree view of activities happening on your critical asset or critical databases. The purpose of both, you can use the combination of both, or you can use just either of one. It really depends on your use cases and what exactly regulatory compliance your organization is following, whether international or local. So from the audit collection perspective, our focus is to collect audit records. We kind of focus on certain criteria. So one is that, and which is very important, is that privileged user activity monitoring. So when you are enabling auditing at your database layer, whether Oracle or non-Oracle, most of you are interested that what my privileged users are doing. So we provide activity reports or auditing reports focusing on that area. For Oracle specific, you can actually push back those audit policies to the Oracle database, but for non-Oracle database, there is a reporting and alerting, and you can really define your alerts and your reports, more focusing on what exactly your privileged users, like database users, or whether they are doing a direct access, or how that individual accounts are at high risk, etc. Moving it to second part, what we focus is a security relevant event auditing. So it's like security management or account management kind of auditing, and database management events, and what your system privileges are doing, along with, let's say, if you are using database vault, then the auditing of database vault users and what activities are happening from there. If you are using Oracle Key Vault, then integrating with Oracle Key Vault and giving you security related event auditing from Oracle Key Vault also. So this way we integrate with multiple other security related solutions also, and we present in a way that so that you can really make sense out of those audit records. The third part for audit collection, our focus is like sensitive data access. Okay, so what you have, like you have all kind of a data in your database. There are some highly sensitive and there are some which are not that sensitive, right? So for example, your PI information, your medical records, your financial information, your call data records, etc. Those are like a sensitive information. You can define that what sensitive data or sensitive object for you, and you audit on that, and we provide a very specific reports and alerting capability for those sensitive data access. And finally, suspicious activity. So understanding all these three type of events which we are collecting from Oracle database or non-Oracle database coming to the audit vault, we are massaging that data, and finally making sure that what is suspicious activity around that. So for example, you want to have like users who has access during unusual hour kind of a report, or you want to have alert generated when there is a failed login attempts are happening more than whatever the threshold you have defined, or they are trying to access a dormant user or non-existent user, etc. So any suspicious kind of activity monitoring is also part of our audit collection. From the database firewall perspective, database firewall monitoring. So usually when your SQL traffic over the network comes to the Oracle Audit Vault and Database Firewall, we kind of understand by different categories. One, where you start with when the SQL traffic comes, we try to understand the session context, like who is DB user, OS user, what client program you are using, etc. And you define your policy or rules depending on your session context. Then we move to the SQL statement, like you defined allowed a cluster of SQLs which are like your allowed or authorized application SQLs, right? But you don't want any other SQLs which are not really running by your application. You don't want that to be part of your allowed cluster list. So basically, kind of you can say that whitelisting or blacklisting your SQLs and what is allowed on your database, and so that you can really prevent if any unseen or unknown SQL statements are running on your system. And then moving to the database objects, that's more like what type of a data or where that data resides in basically tables, and what kind of action they are using, like data modification, or they're using some altering the system itself, or they are like kind of reading those data, or they are doing some access control, kind of changing the access control on that objects, etc. So such kind of you can define such kind of rules and enable monitoring for your sensitive objects. Like I already mentioned, your sensitive object would be your PI and other informations. So you can prevent as well as monitor those sensitive data and objects of your application. And finally, whatever you have defined in these three criteria, that's a session context, SQL statement, and database objects scenario. If nothing lies there, it goes to something called a default rule, where basically if anything unknown or unseen or undefined coming to your database server, database system, it goes to the default rule, and you can define that what action you would like to take. So in audit collection, we can log or we can alert, whereas in database firewall, traffic which is coming, you can decide to pass. If something you feel that that's an authorized activity and I don't want to log it, you can pass it. Or if something you want to log, you can log. You can have the alert generated, and you can even block some suspicious activity if you want to do that. So that's the, I would say, overall view or a capability of Audit Vault and Database Firewall and how you can utilize that. Let's move to AVDF components. What are the components as part of AVDF? So there are majority of 3 components. One is Audit Vault server. I would say that that's the most important component in AVDF deployment. Then the second component is your Audit Vault agent, and the third one is Database Firewall. So one by one, we will look at these 3 components and what their work is. So Audit Vault server, it's a centralized, tamper-proof, highly scalable, highly performant repository for you, where you're all, whether this is a database auditing, that data is collected, your audit logs, as well as your SQL traffic which is coming over the network, everything gets stored in this Audit Vault server. Your all action management, everything happens from this centralized tamper-proof repository. It's a software appliance, so you can't kind of modify anything in AVS. It has its own operating system, database, and application running on it. We use internally to store that data on AVS, we use Oracle database, along with the advanced or enterprise capability of Oracle database like partitioning, advanced compression, encryption, database vault, etc., to make sure that your AVS repository is secured, highly performant, and highly scalable. So now, all the work, like I said, it's a centralized management console as well as centralized repository console. Now, Audit Vault server will be your to-go kind of a console where you can define your rules, policies, alerts, reports, data archival policies, etc. Everything will be done on AVS. So that's the most important and the mandatory component when you are deploying Audit Vault server. The second component is Audit Vault agent. So this is a very lightweight agent which can be deployed remotely or locally to collect audit records from the targets or from the databases, okay? And that Audit Vault agent send that record back to the Audit Vault server where all the centralized processing, management, and action happens. Audit Vault agent is, I would say, very self-management, self-managed agent. So it has a capability, like for any reason it's not able to read the trail, or trail goes down, or agent is going down, it kind of recheck itself and rebuild and restart. So, and if you are upgrading your audit AVDF deployment from one release update to another release update, you don't really need to update Audit Vault agent as a separate component. The moment you update Audit Vault server, Audit Vault agent gets updated automatically. So, so it does a lot of self-management itself. So you really don't need to much bother about Audit Vault agent, that how it's running, and you know, other management activity for Audit Vault agent. So it supports, like, since it collects audit logs from your target, whether it is database or non Oracle databases or operating systems, or even it has a capability to have a custom collector built, okay? And that's something very unique capability of Audit Vault agent. So if there are targets which we do not support out of the box, but you want Audit Vault to become a centralized console for your all the systems. So what you can do, that using a capability of custom collector of Audit Vault agent, you can write your own agent and collect audit logs from that particular target and relate to the Audit Vault server. So that Audit Vault server becomes your centralized reporting console for all kind of audit logs coming to the system. The third and the final one is your database firewall. I say that optional because there are a lot of customers, they do not want to monitor network-based auditing. They just want to rely on the database auditing capability. So they can just have an Audit Vault server and Audit Vault agent, and they do not need database firewall. But there are many customers, or we also encourage everyone, you should, to get the best of both the worlds, you should use both in combination, audit collection as well as the database firewall. So database firewall is like a multi-stage firewall that inspect SQL traffic coming over to the network, to the database. It's like a first line of defense for your databases. You can, before SQL statement goes to the database, if you have a database firewall, it kind of look at those queries and say that whether this is something you should be allowed, should be blocked, should be alerted, logged, or passed, depending on what actions you have defined. So here at database firewall, it basically enforce policy, whatever the allow deny list you have created. And with database firewall, you can even block activity if you want. So there are different deployment models of database firewall that we will discuss going forward. So this is how it should look like in your consolidated view of your AVDF deployment. Should look like something like this. Where you have users application connecting to the database. Depending on what database firewall mode you have chosen, your database firewall will sit over the network depending on what model you have chosen. So if it is you are saying proxy mode or an inline mode, so it will sit between your database and the application or a client. Or if you are using some other model, it will set accordingly. Okay, so these are the supported targets which AVDF supports, like RDBMS relational databases and non-relational database like MongoDB and REST, etc. Along with the operating system like Linux, Windows, Active Directory, and the different kind of the systems like XML, CSV, JSON, data sources, different type of data sources that Audit Vault agent will support. So your agent will sit on these respective targets where you want to collect the audit logs, and your all network events also, which are coming to the database. So your network events as well as your audit logs, everything goes to your centralized repository, that is Audit Vault server. And depending on what policies or rules you have defined, Audit Vault server will take action, whether you want to get alerted, you want to see different type of reports, or you really want to you really want to block certain connection, etc. Okay, so now let's move to the reference architecture. What are different reference architecture we can use or we can deploy our databases? So reference architecture, we will go component-wise. We will look at it component-wise reference architecture, let's say one for Audit Vault server, Audit Vault agent, as well as then for database firewall. So for Audit Vault server deployment model, you have an option to choose a single instance Audit Vault server, or you can have a paired Audit Vault server. Okay, so you have a multiple host running. And let's say you have even database firewall. Here, I am just showing one database firewall in your environment. There could be a multiple database firewall, but Audit Vault server is deployed in HA mode, where you have a primary Audit Vault server, and then you have a standby Audit Vault server. So first thing, when you are configuring high availability for Audit Vault server, so that has to be configured before you configure your or register your the Audit Vault agent and database firewall. So before deploying database firewall on Audit Vault agent, you configure your high availability for Audit Vault server. You can think of this high availability, something like data guard. And that's what internally it uses. So it's basically two Audit Vault server configured with Oracle Data Guard physical standby and deployed in maximum protection mode, so that there is no data loss from primary to when the failover happens, automatic failover happens from primary to standby, there is no data loss. So you can, there are different models. You can have primary standby sitting in one data center, or if you have DC or DR, you can have a dispersed kind of a deployment architecture where you can have your primary Audit Vault server sitting in BC and your standby Audit Vault server sitting in your DR. Okay, and it is collecting data from respective database systems. So you can have that. So this is one, this is high availability deployment model for Audit Vault server. Here, I just want to hold and I want to ask certain query from the audience, and I'm going to run this particular poll. I have a couple of questions in this area, and I appreciate you answer that so that it helps us to understand how our customers and partners are using Audit Vault and Database Firewall. Okay, so thank you so much for your response. I'll end this poll and I will move forward to next section or next component, which is Audit Vault Agent Deployment Model. So Audit Vault Agent Deployment Model, we have two options to choose, whether you can deploy agent locally on the systems, or you can have a remote host or a remote host machine where you can have your agent installed and register your audit trail using this particular agent, which is deployed remotely. So there are many customers, they do not want to have overwhelm or use more agents deployed on your critical database systems, and they would like to have an agent running remotely so that it doesn't use resources from databases. But in many cases, we also say as a best practice to install Audit Vault agent remotely for the better management, for example, and I will discuss those scenarios like Active Data Guard and Real Application Cluster, etc. Okay, so now, but for so typically how data can be collected, or what are the options that Audit Vault agent to be used to collect the data, whether it is irrespective of local or remote. So one way is that your agent can be utilized to capture a network layer data capture. That's more part of a database firewall. Or you can have a traditional auditing, or where your audit records or a file based. So basically you have a directory based auditing, or you can have like audit table. So which is is like table based auditing. What you are doing, your audit records are going to the audit table. So in these scenarios, you can use Audit Vault agent. If you have you are doing auditing, directory based auditing or a network capture, then your audit record, your Audit Vault agent needs to install locally. Okay, in case of table, yes, you can use remote host agent, and local agent or remote agent collects that audit records and send to the Audit Vault server. In case of host network capture, it basically first goes to the database firewall, and then database firewall sends that network event. But in case of I'm saying again, in case of host monitor, which is your network data capture and directly audit collection, directory audit collection, which is your audit files, actually in form of audit files. For that, you need to have a agent locally installed on the target machine. Okay, So how you can deploy Audit Vault agent if, let's say, your targets are configured as part of an active data guard, right? So in case of active data guard with unified auditing specifically, because we are going away from traditional auditing and I don't want to discuss more on that. So let's focus on unified auditing because this is the way forward. You should be using auditing. So in case of active data guard with unified auditing, your audit records goes to the audit table, and you can have remote agent installed or you can have a agent installed on the remote host machine, and using a connection string, you can connect to the target database, and it collects that audit records and send to the Audit Vault server. So rather than having your agent installed on each and every target or each and every database system as part of your active data guard farm. So let's say you have one primary database server and you have multiple standby database server in case of active data guard. So rather than having agent installed on each database server, you can have agent installed on remote host machine, and you can register multiple audit trails because each will have its own audit trail, and there would be one, in case of active data guard, there would be one, your main unified audit trail, and then your spillovers will be on different standby systems. So you need to register multiple audit trails against one single audit Vault agent, which is running on the remote host machine. So you do not need to, so it becomes a very easy management for you because it's a single agent which is running rather than, multiple agents running on individual database system. Now, what you should do in case of you have real application cluster, and how you should deploy Audit Vault agent in case of a real application cluster. Again, I'm taking an example with REC with unified auditing in case of Oracle. So if, let's say, you have a table audit collection, then you should have agent installed on the machine which is not part of RAC cluster. So you can choose any remote host machine and you can install agent there. Whereas you can, configure trail for each target, whatever the number of cluster nodes you have in that particular cluster, but agent can be installed just on a single host, remote host machine, and not something which is part of a REC node cluster, REC cluster farm. If you are if your auditing is directory audit collection or network trail, then your agent has to be installed individually on each node of RAC. Okay. How your target setup will happen. So it will be a single target configured to your audit server, not multiple target, with a scan port. Okay, where your connection string will have scan port defined, and you will have just a single target of that cluster registered to your Audit Vault server, not the individual nodes to be registered. Okay, now trail setup, I have already mentioned that you can configure one table trail for the target, and in case of directory audit collection, you will configure one trail for each RAC node. Okay. Now moving to the next component, that's database firewall deployment models. So when you are implementing database firewall, we provide a different deployment model. One is a proxy mode, which is more, and each model has its own purpose. So depending on what use case you have and what environment you have, you can decide that which topology fits or which model fits better in your network topology. So if you really want to block or prevent from attacks like SQL injection, or you want to block certain suspicious activity, then you should use proxy mode. That's more inline mode. Wherever if you just want monitoring, you have two options. One is agent-based and the other one is agentless. So agent-based is your host monitor option, where your agent is running on the database server, and it taking network traffic, capturing traffic coming to the database server and relaying it to the database firewall, and then for the database firewall relaying it to the Audit Vault server. So this is more monitoring, but agent-based monitoring. I would say that flexibility here is that most of the time, customers who are deploying AVDF, they might not be involving network team. So if you use agent-based, it's more in your control. You can decide when you want to deploy, and less team collaboration in the deployment is a faster deployment or a faster implementation, I would say that. Now, the third option, which is agentless, but it's again monitoring, and that's an out-of-band monitoring. So here we do network tap or a remote or span port mirroring kind of. So you do not kind. I mean, you do span port mirroring or a network tap, basically capability, where we read from the network device, right? Your network switch, whatever the network traffic is, SQL traffic is flowing to your database. So we read from that particular port and we mirror it and relate to the database firewall and then send it to Audit Vault server. You do not need to install. The good part is that you do not need to install agent on the database server, because some customer doesn't want to do that. But you really want to depend on you need to depend on the network team, and you need to collaborate with another team to deploy this. So it might take more. So that's my personal experience with so many customers. It might not be true in your scenario because every customer is unique. But most of the time, my experience is that sometimes it delays implementation. But for some customers, it's faster, but many of them I have seen that delay the implementation. So depending on what database firewall deployment model you have chosen, your high availability deployment will be accordingly, okay? So there are different high availability model for database firewall. If you are using monitoring, for example, whether host monitor or out of band, we provide, you can implement pair of database firewall in resilient. So you can create a resilient pair between two database firewall. Why do we say resilient pair? Well, what exactly it does is that your host machine, so your traffic goes to both your database firewall 1 and database firewall 2. But at a time, Audit Vault server is just collecting network event from your primary Audit Vault database firewall, which is your database firewall 1. And if it's not able to establish the connection for certain time with database firewall 1, it failovers to the database firewall 2. But from the host machine side, your traffic is going and flowing parallelly to both the database firewalls. However, Audit Vault server side, it is just connecting to the one system. Okay, so this is a resilient pair. You can create with two database firewall for your host machines. So whatever the configuration, etc., you do, it all being, like I said, managed by Audit Vault server, and you register for one, and it automatically deployed with the moment you say that my resilient pair is database firewall 2, Audit Vault server takes care of rest of the configuration. It automatically apply all the primary configuration to the standby database firewall instance. Okay, now if you're deploying database firewall in proxy mode, then you have two options. One option is your active-passive mode, and the other one is your active-active mode. In case of active-passive, what you can do that, let's say if it is Oracle system, you can modify your tnsnames.ora and you can so basically you are changing your client connection. Proxy mode, anyways, you have to change your client connection because your clients are looking at database firewall, not your real database. So it goes through your database firewall. So in tnsnames.ora, what you can do that you define your two hosts, and one is active at a time, and the other, if it's not able to make a connection to the primary one, then it will fail overs to the passive audit wall server. Here, so this is like an active passive connection in case of proxy mode. Now, the next option in proxy mode is your active-active, okay? And even to implement your active-active. So usually, if you are using database firewall in proxy mode, we always recommend that you should go for an active-active database firewall. I would actually recommend that because it avoids your single point of failure because your data is in line, right? So if you want to have your active database firewall deployment, you have again two options. One is that you can do it through client configuration for Oracle databases, or using DNS resolver, you can do you can configure active-active using DNS resolver for Oracle as well as non-Oracle databases. So if you have Oracle, non-Oracle, I would recommend you should use DNS resolver to implement active-active. And if you are just using client Oracle databases, then maybe you change the client configuration. And here, what you do in your tnsnames.ora, when you're defining your host primary and secondary, you are also mentioning load balancing on, okay? And in this particular case, your client connections to the database firewall instances is randomly, okay? So it does load balancing randomly. And you can have as many hosts, basically. Here, I'm just giving you the example of two database firewalls. Now, the second option that I talked about was using DNS resolver. So what you do is that you use DNS to resolve domain name to your database firewall IPs, okay? It could be multiple database firewalls like database firewall 1, 2, 3, etc. But you use common domain name to resolve these IP address. You make the entry in your host, etc host, and as well as you define what is your host name against that resolver, okay? So in that case, it is active-active configuration, and it's going to be a round robin, load balancing. So these are the two options with proxy mode. One is active-passive, and another one is active-active. And in active-active also, you have two options for Oracle, which is client configuration, and for Oracle and non-Oracle, you can use DNS resolver. And we do have a customer who are using this kind of a deployment. Now, other question I keep on getting is on the proxy mode especially, is that network segregation, okay, or a network separation. So how do we deploy database firewall servers in network enclaves, okay? If physical network segregation is a requirement, then you have an option like you can have a single database firewall and multiple network interface cards, or you can just have a multiple database firewall itself. Or if it is without network separation, then it's like, you have one database firewall server with one NIC, and your clients are connecting to the database firewall directory. However, if you do have a network separation, then you have two options, like you can have a database firewall for each separate network, or you can use multiple database firewall network interface card for respective network enclave, and your client connection goes through that particular NIC to the database firewall. So this is well documented in our documentation, and you can review that. If you have any question, you can come back, ask me that question. That how we can deploy. We do sizing as well, so we can help you with the sizing. We can help you with the deployment architecture. All we need to understand is that your network topology, your environment, and what use cases you are expecting to be done or followed by AVDF. So in summary, whatever the deployment models we have discussed, you must have seen that AVDF deployment is very flexible, easy, and it's very agile. You can choose your different kind of a deployment model depending on specifically your requirements. So they are not very rigid deployment model, and it can really sits well with your current deployment what you have, and you have option to choose multiple capabilities, and it's a highly scalable architecture, especially Audit Vault Server. I have seen other database activity monitoring solution where the collector has a specific capability, and then you need to introduce more and more collector, whereas Audit Vault Server can scale vertically quite well. And so that's why we do not suggest to have a multiple. It depends, actually. You can have a pair of Audit Vault Server for each geography or each kind of a data system if you want, but it is quite vertically scalable, and you can have Audit Vault Server vertically scalable, and with a lot of high availability option. We make sure that there is no single point of failure when you are deploying Audit Vault Server. So with this, I end my this second session of AVDF Cafe. That's a reference architectures. And thank you so much for joining today. I'll come back again in 3 months with the next new exciting topic. Thank you so much for joining today.